Welcome back. In the previous task, you learned how to apply conditional formatting to the cells of the table to answer some of the questions we had about our data. In this task and the next task, we will move on to the process of creating charts with our data. We will start by first creating pivot tables to summarize the data, which we will then represent in the form of a chart. For this task, we're going to work with the sales data for the entire year, which covers Q1 through Q4. And you will find the data for this in the second tab named Sales Data 2. This is essentially the same data as we had before, but the information for Q3 and Q4 has been added. And we have also included a new column with the name of category, where we have classified the final percent progress into categories of percentages. While conditional formatting is a great visual tool to highlight data within a table, another way to represent data in a visual form is through charts. Plotting data in the form of charts, whether it be a line, bar, column chart, is very useful when we want to identify trends in our data, or when we want to present the data to colleagues or to a supervisor. And charts should be easy to interpret and read and should give a clear idea of what is being represented. One type of chart that we could represent with this data is a line chart that shows the progression of the total sales for each division throughout Q1 to Q4. To create this chart, we would first need to make a pivot table that will sum all the sales revenue for the salespersons in each division for each quarter of the year. Let's see how we would create the pivot table. We're going to start by highlighting the entire table, and remember you could do that by clicking on a cell in the table and then typing Control A. And once we have our table highlighted, we'll go to Insert and then select Pivot Table. And here it'll ask us if we want to have the pivot table within the existing worksheet or in a new worksheet. And I always like to choose a new worksheet so that the position of the pivot table does not mess with the cells that we already have in our table. And then you'll click OK. And a new sheet will appear to the left of the sheet that you were in, where we're going to create our pivot table. To the left, you can see the empty pivot table, and to the right, you'll see a section called Pivot Table Fields, where you will define what information you want to plot on the pivot table. You will define the categories as either filters, columns, rows, or values. In the values categories, we'll have the numbers. So in our case, that would be the sales revenue for each quarter of the year, for example. Then if a category is specified as a column, it will appear in the pivot table as the columns of the table. And the same applies to the rows. Then for filters, this is less commonly used, but you can have the category appear as a filter with a drop-down menu to select from. For the line chart we will be creating, the columns of the pivot table are going to correspond to the different divisions. So we will position the division category in the columns section. And then we want the pivot table to add the sales revenue from the salesperson within each division for each quarter of the year. And we will do this by placing the categories for Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 within the values section. So we'll do that by dragging these 4 categories to the values section. We have Q3 and finally Q4. And we want to place these values as the row of the pivot table. And now you can see that we've created a pivot table where we have for each division, East, North, South, and West, the sum of the sales revenue for each quarter of the year. Great job. And now that we have the pivot table, we can create the line chart. To create the line chart, you will start by highlighting the cells from cell A4 all the way to cell E8. And for this line chart, we want to show the total sale revenues for each individual division and not the grand total. So that's why we're omitting column F. Then you will click on Insert and you're going to select the line icon. And now we have our first chart. Let's close for now the Pivot Chart Fields menu and look at our chart. So in this chart, what we're showing in the x-axis is each quarter of the year, and in the y-axis or vertical axis, the total revenue or the sum of the revenue for each division. So each line of the line chart, it corresponds to a division, with blue being east, orange being north, gray being south, and yellow being west. Now, a very important step when we create a chart is to format it properly so that anyone who looks at the graph can understand what is being represented. To format the chart, you are going to right-click on the chart and select Format. And we'll start by changing the title of the chart to Sales by Division. So you'll click on Chart Title, and where it says Chart Title, we will rename it as Sales by Division. Now, the labels for the horizontal and vertical axis look fine, so we don't need to change anything there. One thing we could format on the vertical axis is to change the lower bound so that the lines extend across a bigger region of the graph. You can see that sales don't go below $40,000 as the total sum. So you can set the $40,000 as a lower bound for this axis. To do that, since it is the vertical axis, you would go into the vertical axis section, and where it says the minimum bound as 0, we could set that as $40,000 and click back. And you can see that now the lines of the graph had extended across a larger region of that vertical axis. Well, this step completes this task. If you need more time to format your chart, pause the video and complete the formatting. In this task, you learn how to summarize the data in the form of a pivot table and how to use the pivot table to create a line chart. In the next and final task, you will repeat the same process to create a column chart.